Okay, so hello everyone, welcome to our second training session. The topic of this session is pitching and funding opportunities. My name is Emilia Oreščanin, and on behalf of the SmartAgriHubs team, I wish you a warm welcome. This, as you may know, this is the second workshop we are organizing in May, and we have two more, so please check your emails regularly, because I think we are sending reminders. The next one is on the 24th. It's regarding marketing, market plan, and ecosystem analysis. And on the 30th of May, we have one on creating and managing startups. So I don't want to take much time. So our presenter today is Jonas Fromme. He is coming from DDH equihub, and he is an expert in the field of investment, funding, and especially in investor readiness. The objective of today's session is to learn more about the investment options, how to decide on what kind of investments are the right ones for you, and what would investors like to hear and get from you. So I don't want to make this intro too long. Without further ado, Jonas, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the nice introduction. I'm a relative expert. I want to make sure that you are aware of that. There's a lot of things that I have not yet made experiences with. On the other hand, I can tell that I have made some experiences with going from idea to prototype, talking to investors, knowing what to talk to them so that they can be convinced, and successfully raising a first round is what I have experienced already. I have pitched myself to investors. I have reviewed pitches and pitch decks before they were sent to investors, both in successful consecution afterwards and as well in situations where it didn't work out for them, either due to a situation where you're just not investor ready, or because people learn in the process that they are actually not trying to acquire venture capital. The first thing I would like to do today is get a better understanding of the expectation of everyone participating today. For me, I see at least 6, 8, 9 other people next to us here facilitating, and they all have the camera turned off and have the microphone muted, maybe due to facilitators' settings. What would be helpful to me is if we have a short introduction round that tells me if you are participating in a startup currently. So if you are the segment that is looking for funding now or later, or if you are from other sides of the table. Could you shortly maybe make your cameras visible? Is that possible?
I think it's not the
Okay.
setting that is not allowing that, if someone can confirm.
But people can talk?
Yeah.
It seems that we can turn the cams on.
Oh, hi Martin.
Hi everybody.
Thank you for turning off the camera. Are you working in a startup currently?
Actually, briefly, I'm coming from public sector, but slowly I'm touching this innovation and private segment and sector. And the motivation or expectation is that actually I found out that the topics of today's webinar, I mean the pitching and let's say searching for possible funding, are of my personal, but maybe also hopefully in the future professional interest. So I really do look forward to see what I'll be able to learn and experience from you and maybe other participants. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Martin, from the public sector, trying to understand the perspective of stakeholders in the financing process. Anyone else maybe working in a startup or working in a venture capital fund or working as an incubator or accelerator or working on a research project that thinks about getting capital to make commercial use of the innovation? Natasha? If you're talking, I at least cannot understand you.
No, we cannot hear you.
Okay, so I wanted to get an idea of what is your expectation for today, as we have communicated an interactive session to have a workshop and not a lecture. On the other hand, I'm used to situations like this where people are not engaging so much, and I'm willing to have a lecture-like workshop if you want that. It would result in a quite big percentage of the time being me the one that talks. In those situations, it's always hard to target the content towards the audience, especially if it's a small and selected audience like here. So my main focus today is to answer the questions and topics that you are either bringing with you today or that are developing within the more lecture-like workshop, I guess. And what I want to highlight with this is that I'm looking forward to have any questions in the chat in between. I will try to interrupt the session if I consider it valuable to directly answer. Maybe I will skip it for a few minutes to finish my point and then come back to your question. And in exceptional cases, I will forget that you have put something in the chat and need a reminder. So if I'm not responding to your question, please don't feel like I don't want to answer the question, depending on your questions. But please feel free to, again, put your question in the chat so that I get a notification that there's something going on that I might not be aware of when I'm speaking. Sorry, no sure why is probably the answer from Natasha in the chat due to our output that we cannot hear her. For everyone else, we haven't seen or heard anything from you except the names that we can see here. So the only expectation for today that I'm absolutely aware of is that there is a need for getting a general understanding of the workshop. And that is where I would start with my PowerPoint presentation soon after Marcus has turned on the camera in the train, apparently.
Hi. Sorry, I was just finishing my lunch because I'm in between meetings. So no, actually, I'm not involved in any startup or company being born. I'm just part of the team of WP3 here in the project, just a teammate of Emilia here. So my expectations about this is about learning, about this methodology that I have seen put in place in another project, and also see what we can get also, for our participants in the Iberian region also for the project. So.
Okay, thank you. I understood that you want to learn certain methodologies or typical behaviors of that context. Could you point out example-wise what you consider methodology?
No, I mean, the way you will propose to work with the participants, I mean, it's what really interests me in order to, to learn about this, and also to maybe get deeper in the future for, using similar methodologies, or calling people who know about this to, to generate interest and engagement with participants of this type of workshops.
I get that. Trying to be able to talk the language, having heard certain buzzwords, knowing how to navigate through them so that you're able to engage with stakeholders of your interest. Okay, thank you so much for adding another expectation, which is, to my understanding, more or less in the similar category, which suits the lecture. It's not really a lecture, but it will be more a lecture, I guess, due to the engagement here that I will start with now. Just for the potentially attending startups, a very quick overview on allocating you in the maturity model of getting funding. So I hope you still see my Miro board and screen. And with that, you hopefully see the frame that I today have. I look over time from something that is an idea, be it rough or be it specific, maybe even already a minimum viable prototype or minimum functional prototype, maybe even a minimum viable product. This is where we start. What my frame is that you always have to build something first, and that you have to validate it with external partners from the market. So that everything that happens before investment is trying to build something, a product, and showing how it would gain traction if you would invest more time and resources into it. And from what I consider typical and from what I have experienced as effective, especially compared to this gruesome stories that sometimes people hear about having to pitch to 50 investors at least to eventually get a yes, I think there is channels that are more effective in both targeting investors and then being happy with the investors you meet along these journeys. And that is usually available in more or less any developed startup ecosystem. And when I say startup ecosystem, that more or less correlates with any city above, I don't want to lie, but let's say roughly 100,000 inhabitants, maybe a few 100,000 inhabitants. And as soon as if you are above 1 million, then you can be quite sure that there is a local ecosystem of people who are in the startup scene or investing or hackers or at co-working spaces, at incubators or accelerators. And in alignment with that, the city usually has a huge interest in being an attractive location to attract startups / the new economy. And we consider, or we assume that building, prototyping, finding teammates, testing your idea with the customer segment, the target market, is things that you pursue anyways before you get in touch with the investor the first time. Because in general, investors expect a certain maturity to invest, and sometimes it's hard to tell or to objectively put into criteria when you are investor ready. Because the range of investors is quite broad, although they are typical market participants in this realm. There is also a quite huge variation where you can find unique investors with very unique approaches of how to handle investment, how to handle due diligence, risk assessment, and so on. Let's say you would go the recommended route from us today. This is not legal advice. This is not necessarily best practice, but it's the best we can tell you about what we have seen and what we have read about and where we interacted with people. So what we think is that you are trying to build something and you somehow get the feeling that there is a demand for this. In the best case, because you have built your prototype yourself and people already want that prototype. That is the best way possible. I'll show deeper why this is important in the coming slides. But as long as we stay on the Miro board here to have a quick and rough overview of this maturity journey towards more resources for your product and your vision, I'll stick to here. So what we consider possible is that you end up at a network event organized by one of your local entities. And if your local realm is maybe not so well suited or maybe not so big, too rural and so on, then there's different cities in Europe that are now eventually again easily reachable. And next to that, I can also only recommend to visit other cities and their events, as you will gain valuable insights into the entrepreneurial normality and the startups ecosystem normality. As people say, every startup ecosystem or innovation ecosystem is different, although they of course are similar, otherwise they wouldn't carry the same name in general. So let's say you are at a network event and you are maybe getting into this mingling and talking about why you are there, and then you have to be attractive, of course. Hopefully you have a rough idea who's attending these events, and if you have made sure that it's a typical and well-reputed event in the local scene or on the regional scene, then you can be quite sure that there will be investors or people with relationships with investors attending. And if not, the people that are facilitating are usually carrying the interest to connect the attractive ones, not necessarily everyone, because you can also make an investor not come back to your ecosystem by recommending too many possible invests where they don't consider it likely to profit from. Yeah, so let's say there are either people who can connect you to investors or they are directly at the place. What you have to do is you have to be able to shortly and concisely attract them to continue with you, because building up the relationship with an investor is a continuous story over time with different characteristics over time. And the very first one is to show that you yourself with your idea, your team, are not one of the other 9 cases out of 10 that they look at. And for that, you want to make sure, I've put it down here really quickly, the very most important points to make clear very quickly and without adding too much of other narratives around this is A, B, and C. We know an important and big problem. We can quantify it. We know how to solve it, / we have solved it already with our product or prototype. And now we are in the situation that we need more resources to follow the traction. If you are in that golden area, then you are in the sweet spot of a pre-seed or seed investment, maybe called idea investment, depending on the person talking. And that is your entry point into the standard route of venture capital. Before we go into the standard route of venture capital, convincing a business angel or a venture capital fund manager towards investing the first round into your company, I want to quickly show you the alternatives, because the sweet spot for investors to get into your business is when you actually don't need the investor anymore, or you only need the investor to grow quicker than you would anyways. Because although it is a risky area, of course, investors try to de-risk their investments, and that is why they want to have valid business models. Problem, the invisible hand of the market doesn't tell its full rules, so we never really know something is going to work until it works as a business, which is why I just stated that you usually don't need the investor anymore when you are so ripe that they definitely want to invest. This is also why some investors say yes and some investors say no. So please don't misunderstand how I put pitching to many investors first. It may not be necessary to pitch to 50 people to have a successful pitch, but you will definitely be wrong in your assumptions if you consider the first one being a direct match, for sure. That is also wrong. So if you want to avoid investors in general, because you maybe want to have a lot or secured freedom in your organization, or if you, for any other reason, don't want investment for now, there's things with which you can bridge the so-called death valley of startups. As you might heard, roughly 9 out of 10 startups fail after incorporation within 12 months and or within 24 months, depending on how you define the point of failure and which data set you look at. In general, you can say a lot of the startups that get financing in the first round die within the first 1 or 2 years. And that is mostly due to the so-called valley of death. And the valley of death is mostly for startups that do not find enough traction early, so that you're not making revenue because you take too much time to build your product, or the market is not big enough or not interested enough in your value proposition. For avoiding such things, it is anyways key to start early with getting the funding. And just for the frame that I wanted to introduce you to, if you consider raising a round to be your point for liquidity, then you have to assume 3 to 12 months for the full process if you're at the maturity stage seed or series A. Fast investors, and the market is now weighing a little bit more towards the attractive founders rather than being the venture capital, the limited factor. Some venture capitalists have become faster over the time, and especially business angels in the more risky areas before are quite likely to sign something really quick. That might feel attractive to you in case you're getting investment, but you also have to be aware of the dangers of quickly signing something that is hardly changeable afterwards without everyone agreeing, also known as the opposite of a conflict. So as soon as you write or sign something as your company shareholders and you let others in, you are losing your power effectively, or a big degree of that power. So really make sure that you know whom you're getting in bed with, and make sure that you're allowed to do that. Make sure that you know the history of investments, and maybe even get in touch with the portfolio of the venture capital fund that is interested in it and investing in you. I've now mentioned multiple personas: business angels, venture capitalists, fund managers, as well as public sector funding / city economic agency of the city. These are the usual types that you get investment from if you're not looking for crowdfunding or crowd investing. So let's say you meet one of these people at the network event. You have successfully and quickly introduced your idea that is developing really well as your product is demanded by the market, and you are just having problems to pursue more customer requests. As stated, this is the sweet spot to get a second talk with an investor, and you might experience
I think, okay. I think we lost you for a second, and now we
Yes.
don't see your screen.
Okay, what is the last thing that you have heard?
You explained the I think 5 not participants, but the venture capitalists, and you mentioned all of them and started explaining, but then it stopped, it froze.
Can you see my screen again?
Yes.
Okay, you can see it, hear me as well, so I'll continue.
Yes, of course.
Are there any questions in between? I have talked a long time.
Actually, I have a question.
Yeah, feel free.
When is the right time? I mean, you did mention some timeline, but when is the right time to approach someone? Like, was it when you have an idea, or do you have to have a prototype, or in what stage is your product supposed to be the right stage to approach someone?
Amazing. I'll now switch to the PowerPoint as I have my key points clear, and the investor's expectation, as well as what to put into the contacts first, is what I can also communicate by the PowerPoint. But let me just directly jump to the right point in time. So you are basically here as a startup. You see my PowerPoint, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we're in the situation that we expect a certain amount of resources that we have to invest into building something so that we can profit from it, so-called return on invest. And we are now at the question, at which point in time do I approach an investor? And that depends in the first instance on your own needs, because investors are there on different axes. And the short answer is, if you have an idea and nothing else, you might find a crazy business angel or start a crowdfunding. It is not so likely to succeed. If you are in pre-seed or in the area where you're trying to find a solution for a problem you have validated, then you might find some risk-oriented business angels and maybe even some pre-seed/seed venture capital funds. So what you have to know first is that there are different investors with a different risk profile looking for different maturity grades of a company in creation. And you have to know what they mean when they self-describe them online. And they usually call themselves seed investors or seed venture capital fund or seed business angel or pre-seed business angel, as well as early stage venture capital fund or early stage business angel. So this is a rough axis on how to assess the maturity and how to better understand as a startup, where am I? Problem solution fit is a rough scene where you're building your minimum viable product, your first output, and try to learn from the market's feedback behavior, what to necessarily add to succeed, or maybe even that you should break up. If you are above that, so that you have gotten good feedback on your prototypical level of product installation, then you should continue investing in building your actual product. And we put the name of product market fit to the end of that phase. So this is where most investors I have heard of are most likely to invest shortly before product market fit. Or put differently, just at the point in time where it's basically already clear that you are having a huge demand and that you could, if you had more access to resources, also build enough to meet that demand. And then there is later stage investors that are basically investing into companies that have one launched product that is already selling and being profitable. Maybe the whole business is not profitable, but at least the intention of the initial launch is met. So if you're, for example, a data-driven company that first wants to gain access over channels so that there's huge data inflow, and you plan to commercialize that on a certain business strategy later on, then this could also be considered, how is it called, break even, more or less profitable, as the launch intention is met with a backflow of resources, but not necessarily money. In that case, it could be data. Does this answer your question?
Yes, definitely. Thank you. I
Okay,
wasn't aware of these stages, but it's great to learn. Thank you.
Okay. I'll put a little bit of context around that sweet spot positioning, and we'll start from the beginning, because I will also cover the last point that I did not fully cover in the initial framework introduction, at the point where you are invited to have the deep pitch or the pitch in person, and or you are invited to send your read deck. Note, there's a difference in the pitch deck that you bring when you are asked to pitch in person, and then the pitch deck behind you just extends to your storyline that you are pitching on audio level. When you're only asked to send your read deck, then this is expected to be, I'll quickly point at it later again, this is expected to be a self-explanative, fully covering PowerPoint deck, maybe 20 pages, on which, basically everything from something before the business plan or maybe the output of the business plan is projected in a easily digestible, but also complete way. So I'm Jonas, I'm from equihub, Innovation Services Society, or / at least should in the future again, as we are facing the boundaries of the planet, and in agriculture we are very aware of it. We want to make it easier to be part of building the new economy. We do so by building an online white label platform in combination with these trainings and consultations for different entities like utility company, bank, universities, and program clusters. And we are funded by the European Union, the Fund for Regional Development, and one of our key partners is the one-stop agency for founders in the state of Bremen, being a pioneer in how the government in the future wants to handle the founders' journey locally per state. Together we're here in the SmartAgriHubs context, so I guess you all know that, and we just handled the expectation level, which is more or less understanding the realm better in general, no specific questions put on the table yet. So very big start. What is innovation and how does it relate to investors and what you are hopefully doing or trying to achieve, or at least trying to match with each other as someone from the public sector? We can start with the definition by Schumpeter, who is one of the most recognized researchers in this field. And he basically states that economy runs through plateaus. So it's not a constant linear growth, but we are stepping in terms of growth steps on one phase over the other. And in between the state of change, we have entrepreneurs changing that field. So in a quite also old-fashioned or at least historical point of view, he says that we are in a society or in a sub-market, and we have certain parameters that provide stability until someone breaks the current normal or / the new normal and puts in something that takes stability to create something new. And this cycle of seeing the equilibrium and then breaking it as the routines can be improved significantly is where we believe you are hopefully working or aiming to work towards to. And coming from the very general definition and making sure that we are understood as people who believe in the importance of innovation. We know it can be hard sometimes to get one no after the other, although you know you're right. So that's a typical thing. We have gone through it. I hope you're not going through it too often. And if you're getting all the no's, then hopefully you're learning from it. as this is the best thing you can do with negative feedback, be it for pitches as well as for product feedback. And we assume that the ones who want investment or more access to resources are usually somewhere here. I hope you see my cursor. Do you see my cursor?
Yes, I'm nodding, but you probably don't see me. So
that's what I don't see. Okay, thank you. So you're somewhere here in front of the invest phase, and then hopefully you are also here in terms of the view that it in the end provides a positive return on invest. And in between, there's a lot of black boxes and question marks. I'll quickly cover the inventors/innovators perspective, and then I will switch to the investors side, so you know how we look at these two-sided platform or cycle in general. If you feel like answering in between, if you bring any stereotypes about investors and or how to build a company, then this is your time to shine. Some inspiration for you, grabbing up the thoughts, is maybe you know Shark Tank and have seen in quotation marks typical investor behavior. Maybe you have watched House of Cards, or you have heard something from someone that is maybe the uncle of the father of Bill Gates, who only invests in, I don't know, green zepas. If you want to interact, if you want to engage, tell me your best stereotypical behavior of an investor or a founder that you can think of right now. I'll not wait so long for other inputs, as I'm assuming there's not much coming, and I'll cover it by telling you the point of this slide, because usually we get some inputs on, yeah, I think investors suck because they sit there in their big armchair stool and then they say, I invest, thumbs up, or I don't invest, you're bad. And that is, of course, an absolute trivialization of the process, although it sometimes shows reality. So what we want to do is to break up with the stereotypes and open up your thoughts for more input on how different investors can be. And for that, you have to know how to distinguish one investor from another investor. And this is mostly happening by the return to risk relationship. And as you all know, with something that is absolutely not a risk, there's also probably not much to get from. And the same is assumably, I don't know, true for venture capital and investments in startups, as there is a high risk, but also the potential to make a lot of return. So the examples I can provide for this that are representative are a little bit old-fashioned due to the huge impact of the market changes in the last years in combination with the Corona crisis. So the leading index interest rates are affecting these things in general. But just to make you understand what the principle is, there are secure investments and there are risky investments. Let's say putting your money to the bank account, allowing with that the bank to accumulate the money and invest it in stable forms on the public market is maybe a very secure risk, secure investment. Where you can expect a return on invest or an interest rate of maybe 8% per year or maybe 3% per year, depending on the risk profile and the other deal terms that you're signing with agreeing to how your capital is used there. Next to that, there are insecure or risky investments or venture capital investments where you would maybe not get 3, 5, or 8% over 5 years with a 95% security of not losing it, and some leverages and not benchmarks, but securities and assets behind that to make sure that you are getting your money back. The other thing, or the other side of the pole, is venture capital. And there you get more percent in the same amount of time. For example, 25% within 5 years as a total ROI on your maybe 1 million invest today. but not with a 95% security of getting your money back, but maybe only with a 50% security of getting your money back, or 70 or 25. And this is actually the work of a venture capital fund manager to make sure that this number they are deriving out of all the calculations more or less meets the real risk. Because on a stock market invest with a very broadly shared risk, you can more or less easily assess the risk level in comparison to the security of not losing the full money. While that is significantly more difficult if you invest hand-picked only in 10 or 20 or 50 assets, which is a typical venture capital fund size. For example, invest in 10 companies with a ticket size per team, roughly 1 million. And please do that only in the seed phase, not in pre-seed, not in Series A, but in seed. The borders between these gates can differ, yes. So venture capital fund managers try to get in touch with most promising teams while trying to avoid getting in touch with all the other teams. I hope you can understand this, this business need they have there. And they are looking for these teams with a very macroeconomical view / with a global scope. So what is a typical negative experience for someone working in a VC fund is that they meet someone who pitches an idea that is maybe even considered innovative locally, but is maybe already outdated on a global scope because people are doing this for years in some other edge of the country or the world. This can be one thing. The other thing can be, you see that this is now a growing market in the local sphere. You basically want to copy something from a different market to the local market. And we see indicators how that is very likely to succeed right now. Then maybe it's even interesting to invest in your, in quotation marks, copies. So it can be different, but what you have to know is that it's a macroeconomical view. They have usually a global scope. The startups they invest in usually have a focus on becoming as big as possible in the shortest amount of time. And as you see, the big startups that get more money per round, even reaching up to a few hundred millions in the later rounds. So going crazy, the market, some people say. That is mostly to make sure that they have enough power, food, energy with them, however you want to put it, so that they can survive entering all of the different markets so that they have global synergy. So what does it mean to look at the world with a macroeconomical view? They see global business mostly, maybe the global citizens with the ESG scope as well more and more, but mostly they see global business, and they see the sum of currently served markets as the currently existing global business. What they are looking for is people who are trying to tackle unserved desires, which are, to our understanding, new markets. So if there's a big amount of people who would like to do something different than before, but no one is offering the right medium for them to easily do that, then hopefully you are the party that provides the missing piece so that the market potential can be realized. In most cases, from an investor's point of view, this will be enabled by technology. If we think back of how human evolution has happened, we have always looked at our environment, observed principles, tried to find something that makes it less hard to do something we anyways have to do, and then improve on the technological iteration to gain more efficiency. Usually the myth of one crazy inventor building the Tesla machine is a myth because teamwork pulls the lever. So investors have learned this over time, that there was a stereotype on this crazy one person who is a genius in the basement or in the garage, the known stereotype, that might be important for telling a good story or might be important to have a starting ground, which is hopefully available in your local ecosystem. But in the end, it's groups of people that really are making the difference in whether a team succeeds or not. So teams should be complementary equipped with mutually complementary roles and resources, and they should have a clear understanding of the values that drive them pursuing the organizations that they are trying to build. And then there's many myths on which indicators are helpful to understand which teams will be successful. And we also only know that there's a lot of partly even contradicting examples of what to look for. What they are looking for, the investors anyways, are looking for the big levers. So in the best case, a really good technology, maybe even proprietary or hard to copy, with a good team that has already a little bit of a proven track record in trying to build something that people want together in the past. And if then, in alignment with that, the target market size is really big and your compound annual growth rate per year is also good, then you are on a really good way to get an investor excited. We have seen this before, so depending on how far you are with your product/organizational development, you would be attractive to different types of investors. And if you're going the standard route of venture capital investments, maybe in addition with some public funding initially, then you will not only get to know one investor usually. So there maybe are investors that join you early and stay until the end, depending on your deal terms, until the 5th investor joins your organizational board with the 50 million round to make it a public company maybe. Maybe investors 1 and 2 leave early again because they want to profit from investor number 4 being interested, taking the full amount of shares all other shareholders except the team members are carrying until here to have the full control over at least the part of shares that are not still belonging to the founders. That is, for example, usual when a strategic investor tries to invest but doesn't want to invest in too risky profiles. So they let other investors select the most likely success candidates and then at some point decide to buy them out, all of them. How to get there? It's difficult and there are different investors. You can maybe be lucky and find a very rich person who has no experience in investing at all to give you the first and probably last investment of 500,000 initially just because they believe in you and your idea. If people repeat this over time, they usually learn that they want to do that with people who have more experience in this. And then again, some people afterwards learn that they again shouldn't have done it with people who have more experience in this because sometimes in this area we have bubbles. I don't want to dig deeper into the bubble kind of financing potential growth or even spending a lot of money on already deficitary companies, believing in their future success. I would like to more dig into the reality of where you are hopefully or where you are recommending things to others. And this is in alignment with all the experiences that I have made. It's no global truth, but it's my sincere opinion that teams should be able to serve a market need on their own in some way before asking for money. And this is something I learned from also interviewing business angels, venture capitalists, incubator leaders, accelerator leaders, banking managers, and so on. And this ex-founder who successfully sold his company to a Google VC in the range of a few millions, he told me as an active business angel in that time, I would never invest into someone who's not able to make it to their first product level somehow on their own. It just doesn't match with the characteristics that I look for, that I consider crucial or key or essential to the future success of this organization. So in short, they expect a team that can build something and sell something on their own initially and would like to invest into people who want to continue such a path with more money to grow faster. Any questions here? I see a chat, I'll open it. 1:28, what is our time now? I cannot see anything except my screen. Let's see if I can change it.
We have some questions, so I can read them for you. If that's okay.
That would be great, because
Yeah, of course. So the first question is coming from Ruth. What are the common barriers when you approach to an investor? For example, language is often a problem.
it is put like a question, so how can I answer this? If you don't understand each other really well, then there is bigger chance for conflict later on. I believe in general that's true about communication.
Yeah, but I think she also meant this as an example, but what are some other barriers when you're approaching investors?
Okay, so I think the first barrier is to not know where to find them. That is, I think, one thing. These people usually have an interest to be not too visible for everyone, so you have to kind of know where you're fishing. That is why I introduced you how we think you should approach it, by your local ecosystem, if not available, the next bigger city, and approach network events to get in touch with locally active people who can recommend you to good investors. Another barrier is, if you know how to approach an investor, like where to find them, then you might still approach them with the wrong focus. I personally believe investors should be quite open to entrepreneurs from different backgrounds, and should not put exclusivity increasing barriers to this heart of democracy. So I believe that they should be open to people not knowing their expectations and just be transparent about the expectations, but it can be a barrier that you do not know their standards, but they expect you upfront to know the standards or have researched them. And if you're not meeting their standards, they will just cold-bloodedly ditch you in terms of your requests. That is another barrier. Ruth, if you could extend why you're asking, I can maybe target my answer a little bit to your point. In between, I would continue with Milica's question. I can now see the chat again.
Yeah, of course. So what are some common mistakes that people make when pitching their business idea?
Not tailoring their pitch to the target audience. So Milica, I think you're talking about a pitch towards investors. If yes, then you have to do your homework. These investors that I do not represent and do not want to represent would say. Doing your homework means Googling the expectation of the investors, and I will show you the other screen again, in which I have put a little bit of forwarding links. So as I said, go to network events, go to have a network contact, hopefully have something in the bag that people want, that you build more of it, and then quickly and concisely convince an investor to, by telling the big problem, the big solution, and how you are already having traction, asking in the last part for a personal pitch or to send your read deck. If you are in that realm, here are some further leading links on which you can inform yourself. I would quickly go through them and check if there is still a question then afterwards. These are the business angels from Bremen. As I am stated and located in Bremen, I wanted to highlight them. This is the chapter of Germany for the Business Angels Networks Association in Germany. So you can find all of the local chapters and how to get in touch with them there. This Google or DuckDuckGo search shows you where are venture capital funds in Europe, and yeah, some links that are highlighting some of them. Here is a link to one of the best-selling deal term standard books of how to write the contract. And I can really recommend the book. I have read it myself. It was in alignment with a lot of things I had read until then. And I was happy to find one thing that really put together all of the standards I knew of. Because when I read other content, I was always like, hey, this is not really correct. This is not true. Experienced founders disagree to this advice. Investors disagree to this opinion, and so on. But cooperativa.vc/the deal terms was really a really good standard book. You can, I think, rely on it in many cases. Yeah, that's the expectation of business angels and VCs. They want a face phase matching pitch deck that tells how far you are with the content. So you have to know if you're pre-seed, if you're seed, if you're Series A, and usually people who ask about this are pre-seed and seed, maybe idea. Okay. The question was again.
So should I go? Okay. So the next question is from Peter. When is the right time to look for an investor and how to choose the right investor?
Okay. I see how I now have not really answered the other question to a full extent. So what is the most common mistakes? I will shortly go through the 3 things that pop up in my mind first, but it's not necessarily a full set of the maybe 7 to 10 mistakes that are most usual. So mistake number 1, not knowing which content to pitch. Which content to pitch depends on which environment we are in. And this is usually either a short initial pitch, like an elevator pitch. Make sure you know what an elevator pitch is more deeply. Ask a question here. If you really need to know it now, I will help you. I have shown you the most important things, that it's big problem, solution works, and we have traction. Now we need more money to do more of this. This is what they want to know. And in the pitch afterwards, it's also about knowing what the homework has as a result. So make sure that you are in the standard guidelines of 10, 20, 30, for example, that you have only 10 minutes of a pitch with maximum 20 minutes of slides with a letter size of minimum 30, so big text, big pictures, and a good storyline for the pitch afterwards. Make sure that you know which content is expected, because investors see many pitch decks per day and they have like a standard expectation. If it's not the read deck, but you pitch in person, I will switch to this. Can you see Y Combinator now?
Yes.
Genau. So this is one of the best templates that you can rely on if you want to build something very roughly on the seed level. This template explains in a really good way, I couldn't do it better, how to put together the first investor pitch decks. This is more tailored to the American venture capital market, which has a little bit of a higher risk profile than the European expectations usually. The other pitch template that is a little bit more sophisticated and would also work for pitching for a Series A is from Guy Kawasaki, also a very well-known and reputed person in the Silicon Valley. And he has put together an equally well-digestible template for how to build your pitch deck. In this case, the pitch deck you bring when you pitch in person. He's shortly re-explaining the 10, 20, 30 rule. Sorry, I mixed it up earlier, 10 slides, 20 minutes, of course, 2 minutes per slide max. And afterwards you see nicely and happily here with a download now. It was not always a download, of course, leading to Canva, as he is evangelizing for Canva. You find, after declining all the cookies, you find this slide deck in which you can see which 10 slides you need for a pitch deck. So that you have seen it once, you can hopefully assess the links and all the content later on. As it was communicated earlier, we have this standard slides with problem, opportunity, the value proposition, how you solve it, the underlying magic or a special advantage that you are bringing to the investment opportunity, maybe a patent or intellectual property, but that is kind of out-fashioning itself depending on whom you ask. The business model, so who pays for what to whom in which frequency, due to which motive, and across which channels maybe in a nice flowchart. Then how you want to achieve this eventual business model step by step, how you are starting, what is your first business cycle, and how do you add on more business cycles so that you reach your eventual business model, highlighted and explained in the slide before. You show that you know the market and the competitors, although you should not try to go into competition with convincing investors, although you exactly know what you're doing and trying to beat someone that is before you already, and then you want to be more efficient, but that's a hard case, put it shortly. Show your team, the management team if you want, but the team mostly, and how they are complete. set of people you need to do your next phase, plus the financial projections which lead to the loss that you are technically having and yet that you want to practically have financed for so that you can make it. And for that, you would in the end show where you currently are. So maturity of product, maturity of customer/market, and on which point in time you're planning to spend which amount of resources on which sub-goal. And this personal opinion that Guy Kawasaki usually adds on to any pitch deck. If you're starting a pitch deck with telling the investors where you can exit, you're usually doing something wrong or you have no idea what you're talking about. I have to add to that as a complementary point of perspective that some people know what they are talking about if they bring this up early. If you look at the performance of the High-Tech Gründerfonds, the most active German or European seed or pre-seed fund, you will see that they have a really good exit quote and that there are numerous examples where they have more or less predicted who maybe would be interested in acquiring a company later on. That doesn't give you a promise, but it shows that there are people who can quite early tell who might be a strategic investor later on, especially if it's technology driven and originating out of a real market problem where you know that big companies are looking for solutions for. Okay, we have roughly 1 hour left. This was a short switch into what to do wrong with investors. Usually it's not knowing these typical steps to approach them, and then it's pitching the wrong content. We also had the one other thing I wanted to mention that is usually wrong, but that's details. Knowing this would answer most of the cases where things are going wrong. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, next. Now I can continue, I think, with the next question.
Yes, sorry, I already read it because I thought you answered. So when is the right time to look for an investor? I think we answered that, but how to choose the right investor?
Yeah, let me switch to the PowerPoint because I have some things coming soon for that. We were here. This would have been my next slide. And the question in the room is when to approach investors. And I have more or less answered it by knowing which stages they are positioning they themselves in. So you have to know what they mean with seed or pre-seed or Series A. And this slide is then not too important.
We cannot see your slide. We see the mirror board now. Are you sharing the presentation?
Yes, I was thinking that I would share the presentation. I will switch now. PowerPoint, here it is again.
Oh, we see it now.
This is where we were. And
Yes.
I was about to continue with, just before I was jumping out, with this typical market life cycles where investors would like to invest in people that are basically starting a new cycle here. I'll quickly go through it. I have more or less explained this already. Yeah, here you see it is partly important to the question of when to approach investors, as this left picture shows how innovations usually spread in given markets. And that is where you see that investors can basically predict when something is going to be successful for sure. And that's what's not written down in the details here. But if you look at the percentage of people having adopted a new thing, in this case called early adopters, there's a sweet spot of roughly 14 to 18% of any given market population. And if you reach that level, it can be quite likely, or it is most likely, that it will spread out to a mass usage. So if you are able to explain very concisely why you have reached the point of 15 to 20% in a given market population, then it is very likely that there are a lot of investors who would have the opinion that this is the perfect point to get in. If you lack money in that moment in time, or in best case, a few months later, so that you act in time, then probably it's a match. And depending on how early you want to involve investors, it is up to you to get in touch with them very early. So I'm now trying to answer also the second questions of, or the second aspect of the question of when to get in touch with investors, because there is a different answer as well. The point of investment in time is what I have focused in the past. When to get in touch personally has a whole different answer, but with the following limitation. As soon as possible is great, technically. If you try to get investment too early and you show that you have no idea about the market, that you don't have enough idea about how to build the product or how the investment things work, then you are maybe not going to see the investors again. They will be nice and say, yeah, let's keep in touch, but maybe they will not meet up again. On the other hand, many investors say that they try to get in touch with potential investees very early so that they can get in touch with them and get a better idea of whom they would invest in later. Because for a lot of investors, it is a current problem that they have to have a high deal flow number, so many deals per time, as they want and need to get rid of the money in their portfolio within a given time that is contracted. And then they want to make sure that they are spending it on the right teams, of course. And that is why they have a hard time ditching someone, because you never know who's going to make it. So the other answer to when to get in touch with investors is as early as possible, just trying to get in touch, not promising anything wrong, not asking for too much too early, and then keeping in touch until you are able to anticipate that you need exactly this amount of money for more or less exactly this activities to reach certain product and market development goals. And then you can, with the established relationship, really smoothly tell them that you are now ready to consider investment, that you have established the relationship with you, the angel in this case, very early, because you were wondering if you could be a potential business partner or investor later on, and now you're looking for money. Are you interested to hear more about it? And then, depending on their judgment of yours, they will ask you to either send a read deck or pitch in person or pitch on the spot or whatever, maybe invite you to the communities meeting of the Business Angel Club in which they are investing together, and so on. So at the right moment in time is one correct answer to when to get in touch with investors. And that is bound by, you have to know which expectations which investors carry, and that is mostly knowing in which maturity stage they are active, / which risk portfolio they are serving, and or in which branch or industry they are active, because it is usually helpful to know the market in which you're investing. Maybe you have heard the quote of Warren Buffett, only invest when you understand. And this is more or less also a remark of specialization by some funds that decide to only build in prop tech, or only in ed tech, or in N tech, or in food tech, or sex tech, or name it, there is a branch in the startup world. Did I cover the other question? Not fully, because I wanted to show you one slide that I definitely not shown. Here, this is the thing that maybe extends well to your to the question you have asked. So this is a list of things that are good, in our opinion, if you want to meet the expectation of investors. So this basically answers the question of how to get in touch. In the best case, early, without urgency. A minimum of 9 months would be very practical. If you're lucky, I repeat, if you are lucky, you can maybe make it in 3 months. Everything shorter would, for me, be a sign of a maybe problem or an absolutely amazing way to organize this process. Then the value creation that you're going to be responsible for is introduced shortly and concisely in a convincing way. The team should be dedicated to the problem and aligned from past experience. So you better haven't met yesterday if you're asking an investment today. So the startup weekend story of having investors after 54 hours is, I think, can be true, but it also brings its difficulties in terms of assessing the risk of team breakup, which is one of the most common risks in financing startups, especially if you go early. But later, it's not getting less. It's just about good contracts and good origins of how these stories are becoming real. Another factor of team is that you're complementary. So what is very well-known stereotype is one techie who can build an IT prototype quickly, and the other more being a business person, knowing the market and being able to talk to customers in the way they want to be talked to. Depending on whom you are in terms of providing funds, you might look at the technological maturity level, which is one measure or indicator used in public funds a lot. And there are, you can Google it, technology readiness level, or TRL5 or something, and you will find pictures like this, in which you see how mature is something new in terms of finding its way to the system in which it's supposedly going to serve a continuous role. And depending on which level you would assess yourself in, and depending on how others see that, you are eligible for certain funding streams in the European Union. And I can recommend you to look at the European Innovation Council and the EAC, the European Accelerator for Innovation, or something like that. I'm sometimes mixing up names. There's a lot of things going on and happening and changing. There's a lot of public funds available, and there's multiple ways to find out where and which program funds are available. If I am asked to tell you the most effective way, find out who is locally managing the cash flow of the funds from ESF or EFRE, EFRD and ESF. Because these people know how the practical steps will be taken, and they sometimes are different than the guidelines that you see, and or there's more behind the guidelines than the things that you can easily identify. And then it's sometimes a tough question to know which public fund is possible to match with you. And for that, there's consultancies available, there is platforms that you can Google, there is public ways of informing about which public funds are available. And last but really not least, the personal points of contact, which know how to go through this jungle.
Okay, thank you for the in-depth answer. Actually, I had one question. So did you observe any trends in the investment field? For example, I mean, that is my field, so I see that the focus is quite on the climate neutral solutions, but are there any other examples of those trends that you observe?
Trends. I think I can only answer this in a biased way. I think I have tried to highlight the general principles that drive investments, markets, and technologies and teams with purpose. You're absolutely correct that, to my perception as well, everywhere climate neutrality is the top fund's goal, in combination with a new normal of expecting the cash flows being handled in a socially compatible way. So ecology, social sustainability are factors that cannot be ignored anymore, whilst using capital responsibly. In terms of trends that I think the question is too rough for me, because I think, the general principles are true. I've tried to highlight them, and specific trends, I'm not sure. The danger for me to only drop buzzwords now is too high. Could you specify the question?
No, it's okay. I mean, I know that sustainability is a big trend, but sustainability is such a wide topic, and it doesn't say much. But yes. So I understand the problematics. Okay, so we do have. Sorry.
I have a favorite of a trend. So my personal favorite of a trend is business to government markets, in Europe. So next to distributed energy systems, which are needed to reduce carbon emissions per region, and all of these social approaches, social entrepreneurship and so on, for me, something that is quite clear on the table and becoming big and is still also underrated. So if an investor who doesn't know in which market to specialize now in, and there would be no background of specialization, which is a very abstract theory, then I would say have a deeper look into business to government, be at the right channels and be able to see what is popping up there, because the public sector is becoming a market participant in terms of purchasing solutions. And that is opening up just now, and probably also a difficult area of operations in the next year, but the potential return on invest on building viable solutions in that sector will be huge if the public authorities, which are currently, unfortunately to some degree, prioritizing price over quality and or price over some necessary qualities or characteristics of a product, as soon as that is not the leading factor anymore, there might be a market for multiple businesses in the realm, and the market size is by a factor of 10 to 100 bigger than target markets that are usually anyways interesting. So for Europe alone, it's predicted to be 400 billion in a few years, where a startup could already make an investor excited with pitching about a startup with a target market of 1 billion minimum.
Okay, that's great information. Thank you. We do have one more question from Peter. So when is it better to approach to an investor, and when is it better to go for the crowdfunding?
In general, okay, I would always try to answer this in a specific situation, as I have a hard time with finding general rules, but I will try my best now. And I think that it is, so what distinguishes one solution from the other? One investor versus way of crowdfunding. So at one investor, you have more or less one party to talk to, and they have probably, if you're selecting them well, a history of investing, so they know what they are doing and they can help you with getting into the market, because they have relationships to maybe executive members of any board or department heads that can test your pilot project or something like that, or they know some CEOs from their business career and they can introduce you quickly and warmly. On the other hand, this is just one person, and they of course are on the ship not only for having fun with you and feeling cool for building a company together, but also to make sure that their money is invested in a good way and that you're making profit as expected at some point in time, or that you are failing as expected at some point in time, which is a completely normal expectation of them if they are experienced enough. So I think it's on the one degree matching personally. If you have the possibility to get in touch with investors, then I think it would be crucial to also have a personal relationship that works out over time. So not make it not a one-night stand and resulting in a commonly carried baby, basically, but make sure that there's a relationship of a little bit more than that, so that you got to know each other and know what to expect from the other person. This is my bridge to the other side of the pole, having crowdfunding, where you have multiple people bringing in the same amount as one person or one investor. This one investor might represent multiple people in the back, but in the legal point of view, it's only one entity telling you their opinion of making more profit sooner, usually, while the crowdfunded point of view is the way to have a lot of stakeholders in very early, but not necessarily shareholders. So it's an interesting difficulty that comes up there. On the one hand, you are increasing the amount of stakeholders, not shareholders, stakeholders significantly. There are so many people that now, and that's enough, have the feeling of you owing them something. And you might actually owe them something due to the style the crowdfunding campaign is set up. Are you able to deliver that? Sometimes we see that early teams that do not get in touch enough with people around, they consider crowdfunding the coolest way to start. And there's a lot of valid points about this, especially if a lot of people want what you are building and want to support it and finance it. it might be because a lot of people want that product and they are the first customers. In that sense, it's a really good combination of both validating the market need, having access to your first customers, probably a well-connected community that is willing to give you feedback for iterating the next product outcomes. That's amazing. But it can also be different. It can be that it's a lot of people who have no idea what they are funding, not really an idea of their importance relative to the other 750 people who have given you 25 euros or 250 euros. And then your inbox is getting spammed by a lot of people expecting you to launch, having a question about how their sticker is not sticking on their car's seat, although they wanted it to be on the car seat due to their grandmother having supported this idea from the start, and then they bought it as a Christmas gift for her, and now it's not suiting to her chair. So we have heard really weird stories about how to handle such an amount of stakeholders involved so early. And that is the worst combination ever if these are not your prototypical customers, but people who want to feel like an investor and believe that there's a good thing about what you're doing, but are actually not the customer segment. Because then they think that this business should work out, but maybe you're not meeting the market's demand, and then they think they can tell you what is the right thing to do. If you're fine with that, because they are only stakeholders but not shareholders, and that is just public opinion, and you know and are able to differentiate yourself from that feedback realm, like, I don't know, a football player in the stadium, and just continue with good business decisions, hearing that, but also hearing all other voices that maybe have a better view in the field, then it might work out. But you have to be aware that there's a lot of stakeholders being involved very early on, and that especially if you're maybe not too experienced as building a company, building a product, building a team, then you might have a lot of pressure on your shoulders after a few months, while not being so experienced with all the other stuff that is happening behind that, in combination with the problem that crowdfunding is, depending on how you handle it, in many cases underrated in two critical factors. It's mostly underrated how much effort you have to put into it to have a successful and highlighted campaign compared to all the campaigns that are running. And you sometimes underassess or underrate how this is going to be put into the books. So you have to make sure that you know how this cash flow is allocated in the books. And depending on the country that you're in, you have to consider taking legal advice for that as well, as it's sometimes not self-explaining or only possible with a partner who knows how to handle this. So yeah, key distinguisher, one investor crowdfunding is the amount of stakeholders. One stakeholder, a lot of power, should be the right one. Many stakeholders, but not shareholders, still should hopefully be the right ones. Best case, they are customer segment that gets early access to your actual product. That is, I think, good. And don't make the mistake of underrating or underassessing either the effort for going through due diligence with an investor, nor underrate the effort that is needed to have a successful campaign launched and maintained, not only launched.
Okay, I think that so far we don't have any more questions.
Okay. I'm just checking if I have any content left. On the Miro board, I had the short framework of maturity over time. And in the presentation, I had some more slides on a lecture point of view, where maybe I can fill up the last minutes with. So yeah, if you want, you can choose. I could dive deeper a little bit into company valuation, how to assess the millions that a company is worth, resulting in how to offer a startup share to an investor. I could also go a little bit into the legal body. I think I will do this combination if no one specifically requests to dive deeper into how to pitch and how to get in touch with investors or other sources of funding.
I think that the pitching will be interesting, but whatever, maybe that's just my opinion.
Okay, I think if the pitching is interesting, I would really love to do that in an interactive way and go by example. And I don't think that someone is here who would be willing to go by example.
Yeah, maybe the crowd is shy today.
That's absolutely fine. I've been there myself, not really being willing to join in and engage with the workshop, just listening to what's said, and that's fine for me today. But for the pitch, if we want to focus on the pitch, I will just make like a short outlook into how company valuation works, 5 minutes. Maybe it will eventually be 10 minutes. And then the last minutes, I would go into pitching and hopefully going into questions that result out of discussing a pitch details based on the 10 slides you need for the pitch deck from Guy Kawasaki. I'm now going to the company valuation quickly and shortly, and then we can go into pitch specific stuff. Yeah, I'll start with valuation now. Again, share my screen, and don't be fooled. This is actually also content of your pitch deck in the end, but the company valuation might be relevant also outside of your pitch deck, or it's a unique content point and it's not covered so much in the Kawasaki slide deck. So I will round up the content until here by showing you the basic approaches to valuation and how that would look in a legal body then. Based on the PowerPoint again, it's coming. Valuation of a company. So with an existing business, it's easy. An existing business just does a discounted cash flow. Just does a discounted cash flow analysis. It basically looks at how were revenue streams and costs in the past. It looks at the profit, maybe before taxes and so on, maybe afterwards. And then it multiplies this over time and sees, okay, this is basically every year the same thing and it's going stable forever. So it will stay stable forever in the future. We can easily assess how much cash flow is going to be coming out of this in the next 5 years. And thus we know what our return on invest would be, and in that case also to which interest rate we can offer you the money, if it's a credit. That is the bank perspective. And startups are usually defined by not being functional in the bank perspective, as startups are defined by things like young, fast-growing or potentially fast-growing, and insecure about how or if they will be successful. And thus, this market has its own rules in terms of company valuations, which are usually for people that we talk to, that might be quite early in the process, is a big oof sometimes. So for me, it was a big oof to see the first time the company valuation that others agreed on that I should raise in discussing a deal with an investor. And the point is that it's just for consumer level money management. It's, I don't know, 100 euros is a lot, or 10 euros is a lot, depending on what you want to buy with it. Maybe 1,000 euros is really a lot of money, or maybe a few thousand euros is then a lot of money, especially if you carry it cash. In the company valuation realm of startups, it's normal to start with a 6-figure number. If you are getting to the level of talking to investors that potentially would look deeper into investing into your still vulnerable, fragile entity, it's still normal to say, okay, if you have reached that stage to gain the awareness of an investor, you're most likely in the range of 100,000 and more as a company valuation. Meaning that you are, if you would be willing to give away, let's say 5 or maybe a maximum of 10% in the first round away, would lead to a cash in of your investor of, what did I say, 100,000 company valuation, 5 to 10%, would lead to 5 to 10,000 euros of company money in, against losing the rights of about 5 to 10% of the company's profit in the future and losing the power over making final business decisions immediately. Technically, only with certain rules, like the 25% rule in Germany, which is in many cases when you vote for something is the minimum you need to be against something successfully, although the majority is for it. But yeah, maybe it's easier to show this by example. Let's say one company consists of 100%. Then this company, if it's a capital-based company or wants to become a capital-based company by the next deal, then it consists of N shares, N being a variable of how many shares you assign to it with the shareholder contract, which is written in the creation of the company. In a startup context, the company value is expected to increase significantly over time in a short amount of time, based on revenues, based on market value, based on assets, and most importantly, based on the opinion of other investors. So if you find a match, then it's worth that amount of money this investor is willing to invest it into it. And you have to make sure that it's a range that is healthy for you as well. And one thing that I can tell you directly is it's not the more the better. It's not the earlier the more the better, but it has to be a sweet spot for going through this typical founder journey in a most risk avoiding way. And that would be one of the example-wise risks mentioned is that you feel like it would be a good idea to raise your valuation as early as possible, as high as possible. And you have not made experience yet on how that affects the second financing round and the third financing round. Because if you are too high early, you'll probably not have too much of a factor to the next rounds, which kills the motivation of the early investors if they want to get out early and not plan to be part of the journey for the full time. So that's where you would kill yourself within the first round, maybe even in cooperation with your other angel, just because you put your company valuation to a too high level. So best practice, talk to multiple founders and to multiple investors and to the ones of the startup ecosystem about their current experiences, about standard market prices for startup shares, about how they did negotiation and so on. How does it work? Usually it's different stages. For example, 3 stages that you get financing until you exit the company to someone else owning it completely. In this example, it is a company consists of 100%. It might be worth 100,000 euros. Then there is success in the market. You have done a lot with the time and energy you had as a team. You have reached a company valuation by 2 million, and now you're looking for investment. For example, you would like to give away 10% of the company for a 200,000 worth of money that you're getting in. Maybe you are able to work towards the goals that you have set with the 200,000 euros. And maybe the goal is of the investor to get out after seed, maybe after Series A or maybe after Series B. And you are working with the 200,000 euros you got as an investment. You are continuing your increasing market success, and the company valuation now comes to 5 million as 100% value. And the next investor, a little bit more risk averse, later wants to join in, and he joins in for 20% of for 1 million that he pays or she pays. That is how things can go until Series A. And this can look like this, because the legal bodies are usually in a best practice. In the best way, they are put into a framework of a best practice model, because there's a lot of problems that are coming after the honeymoon phase of building a company together. And this is mostly about shareholder disagreements, and especially about the disagreements between the founders' teams and the investors, or within team members towards each other. How did they solve it successfully in the past? This is always where we look at, also at the startup world. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. What you can do is you can build a startup holding and a startup operations. So you build a startup holding for tax optimization, so that you, as the ones carrying the shares of the operational startup entity, can reinvest any wins you're making on that directly without having to pay the private taxes for it, but you're handling this like a company reinvesting their assets. And in that asset holding structure, you might have the founders being put into one shell so that they share one opinion. That is one of the things many investors expect you to do. And the investors might be allowed to join in independently, so that one investor goes in as a full entity and the other one as well. If you're having a cap table or capitalization or capital table, which consists of 7 investors already after the first round, which can happen in exceptions, then you might be in the position to pledge to put them together in one entity so that you can be sure that they are not crashing your decision-making processes by having a slightly different opinion on the futures company than you do. Yeah, this aims to show you startup holding in which the externals invest. The externals expect you as a founder team to wrap up so that you share one opinion and that you solve conflicts internally. And this founder holding then can carry the percentages of the involved founders. And what is quite normal is that the founders are together deciding about an amount of percentage of the fully diluted shares they are then still usually carrying, that they put as a virtual stock option plan for the future employees. So if you want employees but not co-founders, but still they want to have compensation for maybe a bad salary, or just in addition to a normal salary, they want a bonus on being successful, then you can handle this without making them shareholders. You can write a virtual stock option plan, for example, according to the best practices in the reference book dealterms.vc, where a paper note on how to write this is given, and it's basically participating in profit without being a shareholder for the employees then. Okay, this were more than 5 minutes on how a company valuation over time works. I will just quickly show you the discounted cash flow I have mentioned. This is the banking approach, and it only works with existing historical data or with very comparable businesses, which you can easily copy, and that's hard to find. And then your margins are lost anyways in the competition. A very common approach is the Berkus factor up, where you just say, okay, well, how do I like the idea? What is the quality of the management team? How good is their prototype, in my opinion? What level of strategic relationships do they have? How far are they in the product rollout and sales process? And for each of these chunks, the benevolent investor would add a number between 0 and 500,000, coming up to a standard range of valuation between 0 and 2.5 million for anything in the seed or pre-seed investment range. A different way that is applied a little bit later is the venture capital method. In comparison to the discounted cash flow, you mostly look at the perspective, how similar does this startup look to another startup that was sold in a comparable situation? And this question is only asked by people who join in a company as an investor and try to exit this company before or when it is going to another owner. So if you have founders on board who would like to own this forever, then it's maybe difficult to join that company as an investor, as they don't plan to sell it, and then you cannot make use of this return on invest, as you'll never be able to sell your shares. So how do they do it? They have access to certain databases which are quite limited in access. They find the so-called market multiplier, and then they deduct a valuation more or less by gut feeling, still in a quite huge extent, to come up with something that they approach you with. And if you agree to that deal terms, then you know the numbers in case you're going to sell the company. There's multiple problems, especially data access to comparable business acquisitions is where they have to specialize, where they have to pay access to databases. and why others cannot really apply this method. Yeah, here's some notes on what specific things are important for venture capital deals and startup deals, but there's multiple others, and only working with an experienced lawyer in the field is effective for you. Please do not consider this sufficient advice to go into this on your own without further research. Definitely do your own research, get in touch with people who have experienced it before, research online, and talk to local network facilitators who have been in touch with multiple startups, hopefully already, so that they can tell you the practical ways to go there. So this is it about company valuation. I will now switch to the pitching part, the 10 slides you need in every pitch. Do you have any questions up until here? Okay, no direct question. You can shortly digest that I have opened the room for asking a question while I'm switching to the Miro board again. I really hope that I gave you a better idea in general already today about the realm of startups and investing, about investors and startups, about maturity grades and branch, as well as maturity. Again, the guiding framework is how much time do you need to become more mature as an organization? And as long as you're not an established one, the high risk, high profit investors are looking forward to talk to you if you know the right channels. You have to plan in 3 to 12 months. And for the due diligence, where everything that you have said before that is true about your company and its future will be checked very, very harshly with all the documents you can provide for that. Typically the documents that are also part of your business plan. So let's have a little bit of a deep dive on the last 15 to 20 minutes we have here together today, where we are at the position of having successfully communicated our idea and organizational maturity at the right channel, hopefully a network event that is known for having established relationships with investors, hopefully respectful and high-level investors who have experience in the market, are actively investing, have done it multiple times before, and are planning to let you do the main decisions of the company, but looking forward to also see you act as planned and making the profits that you have more or less securely announced to make. It's a situation you are invited to a personal pitch in the best case, because a read deck only is easy to ask for from any VC, but the probability is as well higher that you're just one of 100. If you get an invitation to a personal pitch, you're expected to bring your pitch deck. And this is what we are going to look now by following into the link that I have put on the Miro board. So from the well-known Miro board, you hopefully know where we came from. We were here at the elevator pitch. We're now invited to a personal pitch. This maybe happened 2 weeks after the elevator pitch, or 1 day after, or 5 weeks after. You now know that you need to bring a pitch deck. You now know that you can look at this link. That is usually a good starter point. You can double check, of course, what the expectations are for the pitch. That is what I would always recommend. Just make sure that you're meeting the other side's expectation by asking them what they expect, or if you want to be more specific, ask them if they are expecting a 10-slide pitch deck with roughly 20 minutes of time, and a potential discussion afterwards with the other attendees on what the investment details and the product and market details are. And then they will probably be happy, say, yes, this is exactly what we expect to happen, but we usually do 45 minutes pitches. So if you want, as an exception in our house, you can do a 45-minute pitch if you feel like. Or they will maybe tell you, look, we have no time for this slot. Can you make it in 5 minutes and then schedule a session with us afterwards if it sounds interesting? And then you have to be flexible. Let's look deeper at the typical 10 slides you have to have. Last 15 minutes. I think this is a point where you can come up with questions again. If you want, feel free to do so. I will shortly go through the slider at canva.com. Can you see my Canva now?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. There's also a great lecture from Guy Kawasaki towards, I think, the MIT students that are interested in listening to him about the top 10 entrepreneurs fail at. And there is multiple other content on what makes startups succeed. There's a great TED talk that says it's about timing. And there is studies from various origins and backgrounds who state what is the eventual sweet characteristic combination of a successful founder or startup. I haven't found truth in them, but this is what I can recommend out of experience from people who are in touch with Y Combinator, who know Elon Musk personally, who have gotten to know one of the most successful business angels and venture capitalists, having invested in Skype, for example. So this is the best I can do, recommending you this content. It is a few years old, things are changing. And in any case, make sure that you know the expectation of the investor you are going to meet. But for general truth, I do believe this is a good point to start from. You start with the title of your company. And in a good case, you have a good brand, a good name that already communicates 50% of what you would like to pop up in the people seeing you or your company's name or logo for the first time. And as a matter of simplicity for someone following up on a successful pitch, you put on the first title your contact details so that they can open the slide deck when they have received it after you having pitched it, in case you provide it. You don't have to, but I think it's normal, and people laugh about you if you don't, because then they think that you are trying to avoid an NDA, while it's ridiculous to ask for an NDA to someone who's investing in multiple businesses who in the end turn out to do and make very similar things. So basically any NDA you would sign would bring you into trouble already, because at least one other portfolio company is somehow similar. So yeah, if you want to provide it, and it's normal, make your contact data available. Yes, and show your role. You can name yourself a CEO of a 2-person team. You can also just leave the name out or substitute it by co-founder if you're not meeting the necessity of having C-level roles, in case you consider C-level roles necessary in general. There is startups with organizational culture where this is already getting rid of. There's no central decision-making structure, or there is a central decision-making structure, but not necessarily the classical pyramid of CEO, then C-board, then department heads, and then groups below that, but maybe different forms of organization, or at least different depictions of how they are organizations are formed. What you should start directly with in the pitch, and you should not introduce your company as long as I just did introduce the title cover slide, is the problem, the situation, the difficulty, the pain that people are experiencing right now, hopefully in a frame that suits how you afterwards and directly in sync with the problem's introduction, how you solve it, how do you provide an alternative journey through the world of problems to this customer segment that you have already depicted in the first slide, so that people are immediately convinced that this is important, what they are currently listening to. It's hopefully not, again, a person very, very generalized as 30-year-old, good, high earning, not rich yet, incoming hippie in Berlin-Kreuzberg who drinks his latte macchiato and unfortunately now has to drink it from a cup that is not sustainable. We have heard this many times. It's then the first thought. It should be a problem where you can tick the boxes. Oh, wow, I haven't thought of this problem. And oh, yes, this problem is unique. This is not unique. This problem is unique in terms of how you solve it. That is the better way to put it. And the most important part here is that the other people can, especially investors, can quantify how many people are affected, how big is this problem, how well do you know this problem, and do people actually want your solution? Sometimes this can be made even more exciting to investors because you have unique know-how. Let's say you are one of the 5 ex-developers for chips, and now your 15-year market blocker contract is over, and you still have the unique and up-to-date know-how to build another chip on your own because you have the know-how. That can be an underlying magic or USP or magic source or unfair advantage. There's different names for this. Sometimes it's a patent to something that can hardly be achieved without the patent. I have seen people who have worked around a patent by building some technology that again was worth its own patent. So don't rely on patents only. An open source community as an opposite to this underlying magic of having proprietary information can be a big asset. An open source community that makes sure that your open source code is reviewed all the time, that all the security bugs are found, and that they are maybe even contributing for free to your product or platform development can be a great underlying magic, as well as that you maybe just have already one other investor on board that brings you into a unique situation because that investor comes from IKEA and he is willing to get you the connection to roll out your new Köttbullar, plant-based Köttbullar across all the IKEA stores immediately. And you have sales security for at least 100,000 units or maybe 10 million units. I don't know how many Köttbullars are consumed per IKEA in Europe, but if you would have such a strategic investor on board who can open up certain market channels for you, then that can be an unfair advantage. Yeah, I think I've said enough about how to show that you're special. Maybe it's just a unique composition that you have been able to put into your product so that all the people are agreeing you have the best user experience. And maybe you were even able to patent it, and then it doubles down on the other magic source having a patent or proprietary allowance to do it. Maybe you have acquired the proprietary allowance to do it by someone who licenses something, but that person doesn't license it to everyone, so you have unique access in the stock market. That can also be. It's basically all of the things that investors want to hear as the cherry on the cake after having identified the problem and the value proposition together as a cake. So if you are able to show them a cake, then showing them how you have a special cake is your goal here on the next slide. This is the dramatic curve they are expecting from any pitch. Afterwards, they would usually like to know the business model. So who pays which amount, or even maybe nowadays, which unit, data unit or money unit, to whom, and what do they get for that? We have a chat message. Thank you for this workshop. I need to go. Thank you for the feedback. Have a good journey. Yeah, business model. In the best case, it's a flowchart, including the involved entities. The customer may be distinguished from that the user, and you show how much money will they pay for each unit they receive. For Spotify, that would be maybe a zero amount of money, but all of the data, how I use songs, skip songs, and remix songs into playlists is spent on their account, so they can optimize the algorithms for it. That is the free part of the business model. And as we're talking in this case about a freemium business model, we also have the level where there is 10 euros, if that's the abonnement rate or charge per time currently. Let's say it is 10 euros per month for full access to Spotify's library, including premium functionality that is skipping advertisements and so on. Swap feeds could be a different, similar situation. You are having your money, 17 or 18 euros per month. You get a bike all the time, but you pay it monthly with credit card on the bank transfer account to swap feeds. completely different business model is the supermarket. I can choose from all kinds of goods that are handled there, and I just buy them piece by piece for the price that the supermarket applies to it, which is usually consisting of the margin of the supermarket as well as the producer's recommendation for how much to sell it. And then they split the revenue according to the contracts they have made, so that the producer / supplier gets its part of the cake and the supermarket as a distributor does. Just some examples for business models and how to depict them as entities that are transacting things towards each other in time cycles. Yeah, and on a platform, for example, if you're bringing together users that have houses or flats temporarily free, like Airbnb, and on the other hand, you have people who are tired of paying hotel price, you might say, look, you pay them the amount that you decide, but for every transaction you're doing with the tenant, we get 15%, or we get 80%, depending on how important it is to find the other party on the platform side. The go-to-market is usually where you can distinguish successful or most likely successful startups for the next phase, because finding a big problem, a big solution, and a big business model is usually easy. Finding a way to get into the final position is what makes entrepreneurial activities so exciting and so difficult in the phase that I have mentioned today multiple times, the valley of death. So if you find teams that are good in breaking down how they are entering the market, so they are fast in the market, they know which operations to do, and specifically they are able to break down customer niches and segments very clearly from each other, including the motives to buy, the ability to buy, and the probability to buy, then you know that they are probably better than many other opportunities in the realm of potential investments. The competitors analysis is, I think, the most well-known and most recognized chart that I think you all know, this table where you list all your competitors, you list all the features as one row per feature, and then, no, the other way around. You list your competitors on one row, and then one more competitor, one more row, one more competitor, one more row, and then you put down all the features that are needed by the market or prioritized by the market. Beginner's mistake, you list down all the features you have come up with. They don't represent the needs of the market, and then you show how you have all the features that you have, and the others don't have the features that you don't have, but you forget to make sure that the features listed are actually the ones wanted by the market. And then you, of course, also fail to highlight how you are different than these and better than them. Yeah. The other way is to do a star network diagram that is possible if you want to depict yourself in multiple dimensions, and in a star diagram that's possible. And the classic way of showing how you and yourself and your investment opportunity are the way to go for the investor across your table is to show the diagram with one axis of one factor and one axis of another factor that depicts how the market decides, and then you are ending up in the top max corner of both poles because you are the best. Mostly this is a thing that investors make fun of, because what usually correlates is the subjectivity of the founder times the axis that were chosen. So if you choose axis and top right corner placement for your startup over the competition, make sure that you know that these axes are representing the sweet spot of decision making and dilemma for the market and not for your company. That you should be a convincing team, I have highlighted multiple times. Introduce you yourself, your partner. One person alone, a one-man show, a one-woman show is hardly successful. Usually investors want to invest in teams. Show how you have complementing background on the target market and the long-term strategy you as a company want to go for. If you have deficits in your team setup, that's not an issue as long as you name it explicitly, because you are aware of the lack you have. Because with getting money in and getting network in, you might be allowed to have a deficit in the team as long as you want to fill it up with the resources you get. Then this is exactly what investors want to see, self-reflected teams who are very aware of their own weaknesses and thus can take measures against the weaknesses in time. And last but not least, not least, one thing before last but not least is the financial projection over time. You might know the hockey stick picture. So a scalable business model drives hockey stick-like growing sales over time. And any company that has a slower growth measure is usually not considered a high risk, high profit investment opportunity. So you have to meet that startup hockey stick expectation, but please not because you pull it out of your nose or your fingers, but because you actually want to and have good reasons to think you will do exponential turnover over time. And how can a startup investor know upfront if that is likely or not? Next to the other sweet spot of having a very well broken down market entry strategy, it's about knowing which things you measure. So your KPIs or key performance indicators or key metrics. How do you measure efficacy as a team? If these metrics sound feasible to the investors, you're probably good to go. There are a lot of standard KPIs that, depending on the industry and the maturity, are important, but probably the one to highlight, I will finish in 3 to 5 minutes, sorry. The one to be highlighted is the golden ratio. So golden ratio means your customer lifetime's value over the customer acquisition cost. So CLV by CVC, CAC. Customer acquisition cost is how much do you spend on acquiring one customer, in the best case broken down by time effort your managers are spending on developing the market channel, the time that the ad is running so that it's bringing you traffic, times the cost per click if you have chosen that conversion model, so that you eventually know it takes us. For Print Peter, a startup example, a few years ago, it was at some point 50 cents per new customer, while the customer lifetime value was roughly 24 euros. So they could easily assess that they are basically making 23.5 euros per the time that we looked at in profits. And having then a number of potential users signing up in the order of 100,000, then you quickly know what is the total profit you can potentially make, still having the risk of completely fading the market and going bankrupt as a company. Yeah, and to make that as likely as possible that you're not one of the companies that go bankrupt, is that, yeah, of course, the investors want to invest as late as possible, although they know that the later they invest, the harder it gets for them to be attractive to you, as you are hopefully either getting closer to dying as a company and accepting that, or you're getting closer to being self-sustainable and thus not needing any external investment anymore. Still, they have to find the sweet spot, and that is why they focus on seeing what you have been able to achieve so far. And that is where you show, again, the product maturity and all other things that you have achieved in terms of organizational evolution. Maybe having won a certain pitch event at your very baby step levels, or that you have done other consulting services next to your scalable software product where you have established market access. Maybe you have had a technological breakthrough or had a patent registration pending until you now just got the yes for the patentability, and or you maybe had your brand registered, so that's just that the other side knows that you are serious about getting this organization run. So all of the things that you basically bring in your beautiful bucket for making an arranged marriage is what you can have to bring there. And hopefully this comes in addition with a very, very clear, also with having difficult background questions on that, very clear use of funds in the future. And with that, knowing how much money you need, you can start the part which is in negotiation. You can start saying that you are looking for investors, bringing you 300,000 euros for a few percent of your company which can now be negotiated about in detail. And that hopefully is the bridge to having questions from the audience, both in that situation as well as here, and or ending the workshop because we are already 4 minutes over time and people are leaving and or have to leave. I'm trying to get...
We do have some questions. I can ease this. I had one question, but I think you explained it when you said business model on one of the slides. It is such a wide topic, but you explained it well. I wrote this prior to your explanation. So I was thinking, if we have to do only 2 minutes per slide, what should we focus about? What should we focus on? Is it just the money terms or revenues, or what is it? But I think you explained it. I think there's no need to go further into depth. And we have one comment from Peter. When you were talking about the competition, he added that you must also distinguish between online and offline competition. And I fully agree with that.
Yeah, the competition is everywhere, and there's offline and online channels on which they can grab you the water, yes.
Yes, I don't think we have any more questions than this.
I failed to see the big gallery view, but I would love to end the workshop with at least going back out of my presentation mode. How can I change? Not anymore at all?
We can see your Miro board now.
Okay. Yeah, it's not too important. I cannot see the participants right now. If there are still any left.
Yes, they are.
Thank you for your attention. That's it from my side. And if you have any questions that you would like to dig in deeper to, or only in a one-on-one session, feel free to reach out directly if you can, or indirectly across the host. And of course, feel free to rewatch the session at the online learning portal where this is going to be distributed.
Okay, we have a lot of thank you. And I would like to thank you for this great presentation. I think we heard a lot of useful information, and I really hope that everyone heard what they wanted to hear and now can actually use this information in their further work. So if there's no more questions, I think we can wrap up the session. I'll wait just a minute or two.
I'll stick around.
Yeah, just in case. But I think it was really, oh, now we can see you.
Yes, I also
Great.
Absolutely stop the presentation mode.
Okay. Okay, I would say that's it. Thank you all, and thank you, Jonas, first of all, for doing this. It was really amazing, and I think that's all. And hope to see you on a similar occasion soon. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.